Okay,
keeping safe.
Thank you. Okay, ready? So, good morning, Lake Elmo, Minnesota, where General Joseph Votel is. And then good morning, still in New York, where Nouria Rubini is and where I miss most after Beirut. This is my city as well. Good afternoon, Berlin, where Philip Ackerman is coming to us from. And good early evening from Baghdad, right? Dr. Ayad Allawi, I take it you are in Baghdad. Thank you so. Yes?
I'm not in Baghdad now.
Where are you?
I'm in London.
Oh, you're in London. Good afternoon to you in London. No one said that. I'm glad that you are in London.
Back the day after tomorrow to Baghdad.
Okay, well, then we'll combine both cities. Welcome to the 26th E-Policy Circle of Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi. Hopefully we'll have you all with us next year. We are all hoping it will be by the summer at least. It looks like we're not going to be able to do it in March like we had hoped for, but we will watch and see. Thank you very much for the honor of joining me. I'm very proud of these e-policy circles. You make me even prouder that you have agreed to be my guests. We are grateful. Both co-chairmen of Beirut Institute Summit, Prince Turki Faisal and myself, have been so delighted that we were able to gain your confidence in us. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm going to start with the usual 4 minutes each, and I'm going to go to Dr. Ayad Allawi, who will tell us, of course, about his thoughts where next for Iraq. Ayad Allawi, 4 minutes to you, please.
Thank you very much for inviting us for this nice forum and with the nice gentlemen who are assembled here now. And let me start by saying that I stressed always before occupation of Iraq to our American and allied friends that the stability of Iraq is very important for the stability of the region. And the instability of Iraq is always will spill over also instability into the region. Unfortunately, not much attention was paid to these views. However, we have now in Iraq a problem, a big problem, and this problem is composed of failure of democracy, failure of corruption. We have militias that are intimidating the streets and controlling the country, and we have also rising extremists as in ISIS. And let me say something.
Dr. Ayad Allawi, I'm having a problem with your sound system. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm having a problem with your sound system. Maybe your assistant can help us out because you are disappearing. The voice is going in and out. Can you seek her help? Try again or go closer and let's see if that works. If not, we will go to Joseph Votel and come back to you. Can you try one more time, please?
Go to Joseph, and I'll call her because she's in another room.
All right, try one more time, Dr. Allawi. Please go ahead, one more time, try.
Anyway, so really the rise of ISIS is becoming a troublesome, for not only for Iraq, but rather for the region. Yesterday, 5:15.
We're gonna have to go to General Joseph Votel. Sorry about that. Okay. You're gonna have to fix your sound system while we go to Joseph Votel, if you don't mind, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm sorry that I have to do this because it's not fair. We cannot hear you. It's being cut up to pieces. Really? So we'll come back to you if you don't mind while your assistant helps you out. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go to Joseph Votel. 4 minutes to you, please. Frame it for us. We are very interested in your views on not only what's going on in Washington, D.C., in the United States of America, but the impact of that on the world in general and our part of the world in particular. Joseph Votel, 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with all of you. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. So I would just share 3 key points with you, and I'll cover them briefly up front, then I'll talk in a little bit more detail within my allocation time here. First and foremost, I think it's important to recognize that the United States, and I would suggest many of our Western allies and partners and friends, retain important interests in the Middle East across the region. And the region will continue to be very, very important to our broad geopolitical security strategy. I think that's the first point I want to make to you. The second point is that going forward, the Iranian problem that we have been dealing with, the conundrum of the United States and Iran, will continue to be a challenge for us, but I do expect that it will be more about diplomacy than perhaps about military force in the future. And I'll talk in just a moment about that. My third key point to you is this: is that U.S. military presence in the region, which has been very, very high for a number of years, I believe will continue. It will be at a very sustained level, and it will principally be focused in two particular areas. One is our traditional security cooperation activities that we do with partners in the region, and secondly will be focused on assisting in counterterrorism objectives. So those are the 3 points. Let me just briefly hit on each one of those again. I'll start with interest. While 2021 is not 2016 when we did our last administration change, and it's certainly not 1945 when Franklin Roosevelt met with the first Saudi king and began a relationship that's endured with the region that's endured to this day, the US and I think Western powers retain important interests in the region. Preventing this area from being a platform to attack our homeland or the homelands of others, of our friends, is an important interest. There is the presence of weapons of mass destruction, and preventing proliferation of those is important to us. We want to ensure that instability in this region does not seep out and impact interests in other regions. We want to ensure access to resources and the commerce routes for which this region is so important to global commerce and freedom of navigation. And then finally, we want to maintain a favorable balance of power. I believe all of those interests remain very, very valid, as they have for a number of years going forward. And as we look at the future U.S. security policy, I think these will have to be taken into consideration. I think it's also important for our listeners to recognize that national security policy in the United States right now is focused heavily on maintaining our competitive advantage against China, and to some extent Russia and other growing powers. But the Middle East will play a critical role in that. And this will be an area where competition pays out. So it will be important to us. My second point here is on the US-Iran relationship. This has been a troubling conundrum for a number of years. We have been pursuing a maximum pressure campaign that has at least minimally created an uneasy deterrence, as one of our recent commanders characterized it. A tenuous achievement that is kind of minimally keeping things in check right now. Military actions going forward without an effective diplomatic component will likely not change the situation in the near term. And while it will be challenging to return to the now abandoned JCPOA, at least from the US standpoint, I do expect that we will see some new initiatives to establish diplomatic channels with the Iranians. I would expect to see that from the new administration. And I'm hopeful that we can find a way to leverage the recent Abraham Accords put in place, or at least supported by the current US administration, and the relationships that have been developed between Israel and some of the Gulf Arab nations. I think these are important. They send a message of unity, and they offer an opportunity to create diplomatic pressure, but also an opportunity to address other issues related with this. Importantly is that we get a diplomatic communications channel in place. And my final point here regards US military presence in the region. It is in fact time to end the endless wars in the Middle East, Afghanistan, Iraq and Syria for some extent, and then other areas where we are much much less direct participants like Yemen. These are a drag on the region, they're a drag on us, and we have to address that. We will have to reconcile and make sense of some of the recent US troop decisions. Some of these seem to be devoid of strategic ideas here. We have to do that. I think that the presence will take on two components. It will be security cooperation efforts, which will be more prominent than large-scale forces that we have seen. These will be focused on building partner capacity and moving forward with our partners. And finally, CT will remain a focus. We will continue to keep some forces in the region to protect our interests and work with partners. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Very important food for thought, and the lots of follow-up questions I'll have for you afterwards when we engage all four of us, five of us rather. Dr. Allawi, is it possible that we try you again now?
I think we are okay now, probably.
Please go ahead. 4 minutes, please. Thank you, General. Please, Dr. Allawi.
I'm going to leave the Iraqi issues, the details of Iraq, until the questions and answers later.
Okay.
But let me point out the 5 challenges that we are witnessing in the Middle East. The first challenge is the Palestinian issue and the peace process, how the turn is taking now, and there should be a kind of solution for the Palestinians, not only a rapport or a friendship and non-aggression pacts between Israel and some of Arab states, but we have to find a solution for the Palestinians. The other problem that the Middle East is facing is the rising of the Islamists, the extremists, and the terrorists, and this is becoming a problem, a big problem. Yesterday, 1,500 people escaped from the Erbil prison in Iraq, and today they burned 2 oil wells in Kirkuk, and they attacked the army in Anbar, and they killed about 12 people and injured a number of people. And those who escaped from prison were hardened, very hardened ISIS guys. The third problem is failure of some of the states, like Syria, like Iraq, like Lebanon, like Yemen, like Libya, and then you can count other countries. And this is really a big challenge because the balances of stability is being lost, and the lines of demarcation between a good country, a solid country, and another country is lost. And we would have liked to see Iraq as returning to normal and becoming one of the major powers in the region. But unfortunately, this did not happen. On the contrary, what happened is during occupation, and especially after occupation, the exercises were very wrong, and the policies were wrong also. Then the fourth problem is the regional powers and the Middle East, especially Iran, is directing a lot of work on the region, and especially on Iraq, Yemen, Syria, and they are making it very clear. I mean, they are not keeping silent, but we are 4 or 5 capitals in the Arab world. And then Turkey, we have a problem with Turkey because Turkey is occupying part of Iraq, is also involved in Syria, involved in Libya, and involved elsewhere, and now involved in the Mediterranean Sea. And one needs to really put this into perspective and put this all these problems into a real kind of diplomatic initiatives and get rid of them. And the final point that we are facing is the transfer of power in the United States.
Yes.
This is very important, and to us, the United States, how we shared a lot of common grounds with the United States, the rule of law, freedom of speech, and so on. But really, we are not very sure now the United States is passing through a very good phase, and there are definitely problems. We hope not, but this is causing a lot of imbalances in the region, and also getting our enemies more and more active. And we can see the Iranians and the militias. The militias now are in Iraq are hitting the Americans, an American embassy with Katyusha. And they are even hitting the army. Anybody in the army who is a prominent officer, they are trying to hit them with Katyushas, with rockets, missiles.
Mm.
And Iran have developed the precision of their rockets, missiles, and also they have invented the precision of their drones.
That's right.
Sorry, Raghida, you are...
No, that's okay. I was going to ask you to conclude your opening remarks, because I just need to go on to give everybody 4 minutes, and then I really there's a lot that you said that I want to build on. Is that a 6th point? Because we got to your 5th point about the transfer of power and the US policies and what's next. And there's lots of questions on that, in particular for Iraq. Do you want me to take this up later, or do you want to continue the thought?
No, that's it. We'll do it.
Thank you very much, Ayad Allawi. Thank you very much. Philip Ackerman, 4 minutes to you, please.
Thank you, Raghida. Let me start by saying that Germany is, and I think everybody knows that, and it's not a secret, one of the closest allies for and with the US of America. At the same time, I think it's also not a secret that we had a tough time in the last 4 years, and especially Germany. We were very much on the spot in some aspects, and I don't want to go into all the details, but one of the aspects where we had profound disagreements was the Middle East. And I think I would like to pick up what both General Votel and also Prime Minister Allawi said at the end. One area where we really did not agree with the US, not in analysis, I think in the analysis we were very close, but in process or method was the Iran question. You know, I think everybody agreed between Washington and Europe that Iran is a very problematic partner in the region. It's a very, very difficult country to deal with, and not only for the regional neighbors, but also for countries that are further away. And the question is how to deal with it. And I think, or we think, and this is a European point of view, is that JCPOA was the best vehicle to move on. JCPOA not being about trust, being about control. So what we have seen is that, well, once the US left the JCPOA and started the maximum pressure campaign, I think what we've seen is that this maximum pressure campaign did not only not come up with clear results, making Iran a more digestible or more, acceptable partner in the region. The contrary is the truth. What we've seen is breakout time has shrunk, and we see that Iran has, broken many of its commitments, and in the JCPOA, and we are closer to the bomb, let's say, than 4 years ago. I think that's a fact. That when you listen to Secretary Pompeo's 12 points he made as a condition for Iran in 2018, as an outline what kind of behavioral change the US expected from the country, I think when you take these as a benchmark, you will find out that maximum pressure has really not brought any tangible results. So what we hope is to go back with the next administration, and I think General Votel hinted at that when he said that he would think that the President Biden and his administration would take up more of a diplomatic approach to things, to sit down with them again and try to figure out what to do with the JCPOA, but also with the question that come along, missile question, regional behavior question at some stage. So this is something where we are very much looking forward to. We feel that going back to this vehicle of the JCPOA and its surroundings of diplomatic channels of mutual talks and understanding is something where we feel that moving on this rail gets us in a better direction eventually. It will be difficult, but I think we have a new partnership with this new administration. Second point I want to make, and there I take again up what excuse me, Prime Minister Allawi, I find it very, very interesting that the first of the 5 challenges is the Palestinian issue. I find that so talking actually, because you would think the Middle East is in such a difficult situation, wherever you look, that you come up with the Palestinian question as the first challenge is very interesting, because I would say, Yemen or Syria are 10 times more problematic, but still the Palestinian question is what is in the region's mind. And that's what people feel when they talk about the Middle East. And therefore, I think that And we were in a certain disagreement with the Trump administration, where they felt that the Kushner plan would maybe lead to some new peace negotiations, but didn't turn out to lead to these peace negotiations. I think we should not forget about this question. It's a central and pivotal question in the Middle East. So let me say that in the context of the normalization, which I find I must give credit to the United States of America, that they have really brokered this relationship between the Emirates, between Bahrain and Israel, between Sudan and Israel. But in this equation must be included the Palestinian question now. That's what we hope for the new administration to come up with, is an idea how to link the two. So far, there is a deep or a high wall between the two. And I think we have to think of ways and means to link one to the other. And that's sort of the second element in the Middle East, where we would hope that with the new Biden administration, we get in some dealing and some diplomatic activities to bring them together to find a way towards a peace negotiations, a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians. I stop here.
Philip Ackerman, thank you very much. But I think there is a big role for you as the leader of the EU, Germany, to really do your thing as well, not only the Biden administration.
No. Put together, no trying to get.
Huge role for the Europeans, and I don't think they have exercised that leverage that they have with the Israelis. So maybe it's time that we push you on that, and that.
You want me to answer right away, Narayan?
Yeah, well, go ahead quickly on this one. I will make an exception. Yeah.
Okay. What we are sitting down together in the so-called Munich group with Egypt, Jordan, France, and Germany, and the EU, and trying to figure out right now, how in this sort of environment we get Israelis and Palestinians back to the table. So it's a format which is pretty new, and trying to use this moment now. And we will be happy to bring the US in once the new administration is there. But
very good.
Now, so, right now, we are sitting, the four of us, plus the EU, and trying to together.
That's great. Hopefully you'll use your leverage. I'll get back to you on this because that's an important point. I want to push you on that. But let me go to Nouria Roubini first. He's waited too long, and I want to give you the 4 minutes. Nouria Roubini, enlighten us. I know you're special, and I mean, you are a leader on the economic policy, but I know that you do the geopolitical and economic, including the economic. So do whatever you want to do with your 4 minutes, and then we'll take advantage of further matters later in the discussion. Go ahead, please.
I'll mute myself. Thank you very much. Since the topic of our discussion today is stability redefined, I'm going to start with the worldview, and then, of course, I'm going to also zoom in on the Middle East, even if I'm not an expert on the Middle East. First point I'll make, we live in a world that is an unstable world, where there is no clear world order. Before the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was a G2 world with a tense Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed, of course, we had a unipolar moment where the US was the global hegemon, but then we tried to build the multilateral arrangements like the G7 and the G20. But the reality was that, as I wrote in a paper with Ian Bremmer in 2011, this looked more like a G0 world, an unstable world without a clear hegemon that would provide global public goods. For a while, people thought that there'll be a G2 world where US and China, Chimerica, will cooperatively run the world, but the relation between US and China has become now a Cold War, a Thucydides traps, and therefore there is also instability. I would like to say something about the policies of the new Biden administration. I don't have time to talk about the domestic policies, and those domestic policies are going to be constrained by divided government unless the Democrats win the 2 runoff Senate races in Georgia. But as we know, the president has greater power on foreign policy and national security, on immigration, on global climate change, and on trade policy. But even on some of these elements, especially if you want to have a trade deal or do an immigration policy with legislation or spend money on global climate change, you need legislation. And therefore, if there is divided government, that's going to be a constraint. Now, on foreign policy, you can expect that this Biden administration is going to be more multilateralist rather than unilateralist, working with the allies in Europe, in Asia, the Middle East, rather than bullying them, support international organizations like NATO, UN, WHO, return to the Paris Accord, and other international organizations, stronger relationships with Europe, maybe even a transatlantic partnership to deal with the rising power of China. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Of course, there'll be greater rivalry with Russia, North Korea, and less coddling of dictator and authoritarian regimes. I unfortunately think there'll be still a Cold War with China, and there'll be an attempt on one side to compete on technology, on trade, on the industries of the future, on the East-South China Sea and Taiwan, but also try to cooperate, maybe on global climate change, maybe on pandemics and things of that sort. But there'll be a rivalry on who's going to be the hegemon in Asia. So the Cold War between US and China, whether we like it or not, is going to get colder. Now, on the issue with Iran, I think that yes, Biden is attempting to go back to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, but I think that the members of the Biden administration realize that there are other issues with Iran, regional hegemony, ballistic missile, precision missiles, and otherwise. So I'm not totally sure that Biden, in spite of statement he has made recently, is going to jump right away on the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action without any of other topics on the table. I would argue also that the relation between the US and Saudi Arabia and Israel are going to be more complex, as the unconditional support by Trump or Bibi Netanyahu BS is going to be different than the past. The US is now semi-energy independent, but of course has important interests in the Middle East, especially with issues of terrorism and nuclear proliferation. But as the general said, the US has also an interest to end some of the regional wars that don't have a strategic importance for the United States. So there'll be an effort to do something along those lines as well. Final consideration, the overall relative and absolute power of the US is falling, with China rising. In the last 4 years, I've seen to a fall of the soft power of the United States. A lot's going to need to be done to restore the damage of abusing allies and coddling up to dictators and authoritarian rulers. But the key geopolitical issue of our time is going to be US and China. And in the Trump administration was strategic competition and even an attempt to contain China. The question is whether we can have a managed strategic competition where you compete on some things and you cooperate on others, whether that's possible, feasible, to be seen. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Miriam Rubini. I'm going to just hop in here on the common denominator in what you all gentlemen spoke about, which is the JCPOA, and also the interest that what Nouriel's last point is about human rights. Let me, before I go into the JCPOA, I want to go to Philip Ackerman, and I want to ask you about this new development in the European position. 27 countries who are now enacting or decided to enact the Magnitsky Act for accountability for violations of human rights. You also, your foreign minister spoke of, you also repeated it, actually, it's not about trust, it's about control in terms of the JCPOA. You've hinted that you don't want to just a quick return to the JCPOA, that you're serious about the missiles, precision missiles, and behavior in the region. You are heading the EU. So what are you doing about it? Can you? So
Raghida, let me start by saying that we don't like to hear that we implement Magnitsky Act. Yeah, that's an American legislation. What we have shaped is indeed a sanctions regime that somehow likes a bit, or is a bit similar to the Magnitsky Act. It's a overall sanctions regime for grave human rights violation, where you can pick out one or another person or entity to be sanctions under a general human rights violator system. This is a very new development for the EU, and it's we have to see how it works out. The one condition we have is the 27 must be unanimous on the human rights, and that shows you
that's going to be bad. That's going to be.
It will be difficult. It will be difficult. But then again, I want to say that we have a lot of sort of shaped and clearly focused sanctions regime on human rights violation, for example, in Syria, in Iran. We have different sanctions regimes, but this new human rights violation sanctions regime covers everything. So every member state can come and say, in Ecuador, in Yemen, in Central African Republic, we have this and this grave human rights violation we want to sanction. And then we have to find unanimity. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not so easy. Let's say.
So one cannot read that, for example, the new development, we're not going to call it the Magnitsky Act, but the fact that you're going to hold their feet to the fire, whatever that day is. For example, in Iran, the human rights violations in Iran, it's not going to be a priority over the JCPOA because that is your priority, right? Like you said.
Let me say that, you know, most of the human rights violations in Iran are sanctioned in the EU right now. We have a huge Iran sanctions regime. It covers human rights, it covers missiles, it covers technological developments we don't like. So many people in Iran, many units, many entities are on the sanction list in the EU already. So that's not new. But what we can do is, if we have sort of super grave human rights violations, we can take them out and say will be sanctions under the new sanctions regime. It's a very symbolic step, and I think it will be used to a certain extent, but this is not. It's not the first time that the EU is sanctioning people for human rights violation, and in Iran we have them on the list already. Now, coming back to the JCPOA, your second question. You know, I beg to differ a bit with Professor Rubini here. The Biden administration, Jake Sullivan, who will be the new NSC head of the NC, he was one of the negotiators of the JCPOA. He was in the negotiating team. Always from the very beginning, missiles and regional behavior were part of our thinking. Now, the JCPOA is indeed exclusively focused on the fact that we don't want Iran to have a nuclear bomb. That's sort of the tool for not having them a nuclear bomb. At the same time, from the very beginning, missiles and regional behavior were very much on our minds. So what we want now is, you know, trying to open up new diplomatic channels, and I think the JCPOA is a vehicle, and sit down and try to, at some stage, you know, discuss with Iran and others, maybe, the question what to do with other things than the nuclear weapons. And that's missiles and that's regional behavior.
I definitely want to go to Ayad Allawi on that one, because I'm not so sure he would agree that you leave it till later. But before I do that, Joseph Votel, I'm sure the Biden administration, the Biden team rather, is probably seeking your advice on how to do this. Let me just stay with the JCPOA. We hear that whether it's Jake Sullivan or the whole national security team, they want, or Biden himself, Joe Biden himself, they want to go directly to reviving the JCPOA and then talk about the missiles and then talk about the behavior, the regional behavior, while giving up the leverage of the sanctions. Is this an advice you would give them? Is this the right thing to do, particularly that it would probably a backlash in the region, because we've been there, done that, when the Europeans and the Chinese and the Russians and the Americans agreed to postpone the other stuff and focus only on the nuclear. And then look what price we paid in this region. Joseph Votel.
Yeah, thanks. I would not recommend that as a principal approach, or that we, you know, single-mindedly be focused on that. I think there has to be a more comprehensive approach to the region to set us up so that we can, in fact, do the things that we want to do with respect to addressing our relationship with Iran. And those things, I think, include, one, being very, very clear on what our strategy is for the region and what our approach is going to be. Clarity is really important here, and so we have to do that as we look at our emerging national security strategy. Second of all, we have to look at relationships. We have done damage to our relationships in the region over the last several years, with both partners in the region and with partners who have joined us as coalition members, for example. And both of those have to be repaired, and we have to invest some time in that. So I think that is really, really important. And then I think it's also important for the new administration to not think that they are in 2016. They are in 2021. It is a new time. Things have happened. The Abraham Accords are a fact on the ground right now in a place like the Middle East. And so we have to look at how these provide opportunities for us to be used as leverage against Iran, but also to be used as opportunities to create unity in the region. And we have to recognize that a military approach in itself cannot solve this. We have to move forward on some type of diplomatic approach. But all of those things have to be approached simultaneously, in my view.
But the Iranian foreign minister is very clear that his position is, and this seems to be and I pray not, that the Biden approach maybe will just go back to the JCPOA. We rescue it, and then definitely we will talk about the other things. Is this something, losing the leverage of the sanctions, Joseph Votel, is this a wise thing for the national security of the United States of America?
Well, again, I think we have to get back to a dialogue, some form of dialogue with the Iranians, and I think we want to try to address the nuclear issue. I think that's a very important one to move forward with. But I think thinking that we can jump back into something that was in existence several years ago, right at this point, I don't know if that is advisable. I think there has to be an appropriate level of groundwork that really leads up to whatever we move forward with. I think it's very clear that we will have to address missiles and other activities that Iran has pursued across the region in this time since. That has to be addressed. So I don't think you can return to the JCPOA as it previously was. I think we're looking probably at some modified construct.
Ayad Allawi, are you afraid that the regional issues, Iran's interventions in a country like yours, Iraq, that this concern of yours will be thrown under the bus, so to speak, while the rush is to just, I mean, and it's understandable. The world cares about the nuclear. Why should they care about what Iran does in your country or mine? Ayad Allawi.
Well, America has some legal responsibility and moral responsibility towards the region, and especially towards Iraq, because they initiated the occupation of Iraq, and they allowed Iran to creep into Iraq and to be a major power in the region after they dismantled the army and the depacification and so on. So I think now it's a must that there should be a structured policy and in coordination with the Middle Eastern countries on Iran and what to do with Iran. The nuclear side is fine to discuss the nuclear issue. The Iranians are getting weaker in certain areas, but they are getting stronger in other areas. I saw Zarif a few months ago in Baghdad. He came to visit Baghdad, and he wants to.
That's the Foreign Minister of Iran. Yes, go ahead.
I think, frankly speaking, America cannot withdraw its interest in the region after they have done what they have done, after the mistakes committed in the region. I think the United States have to engage the region again. And they should not repeat the issue of, when the we are against the proliferation, nuclear proliferation. And when they signed the deal with the 6 countries, we were very, very positive. But I said the great absent thing is peace in the Middle East. Iran has wrecked the Middle East with havoc. It's very clear. You know it in Lebanon, we know it in Syria, we know it in Yemen, we know it in Iraq, we know it in Bahrain, we know it everywhere.
Yeah, but if these policies, from what we hear from our guests here, if these policies continue, that there is a priority for dealing positively with Iran. What happens to a country like yours, where you have Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi under the control, paramilitary forces under the control of the capital of?
They'll make the Americans leave Iraq. If they are allowed and look only on one aspect, which is the nuclear issue, they'll make the Americans leave Iraq and leave the region, not only Iraq, because the pro-Iranian forces are determined not to see American forces in Iraq whatsoever. Really, that's why we need a very structured, very comprehensive policies that America should adopt in consultation with the leaders in the Middle East.
And I want to get to Nouria Roubini, but Joseph Votel, do you want to say something about forcing the departure of the American forces from the region? Then, commenting on what Ayad Allawi just said?
Only what I said before. I mean, I think there is going to be a need for U.S. forces in the region. My particular view, particularly with respect to Iraq, I as the CENTCOM commander, I viewed Iraq as a linchpin country in the region where we had to have a strong relationship, where we had to have some amount of force on the ground. I don't know that it needs to be in the thousands, but it needs to be substantial enough to demonstrate our commitment and our strong belief that Iraq is at an important geostrategic place in the region, and it's important to our interests there, and we want to sustain that. So I think what I mentioned before holds tight, but definitely Iraq.
Nuria Rubini, you wanted to say something earlier.
Yeah.
As a comment.
Yeah, no, I understand that, Biden himself in that interview with Tom Friedman made statements about going first to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action and then bring the regional issues and the missiles after. And Jack Sullivan was behind that deal. But I think that when the Biden administration is going to think a little more carefully the entire policy towards the Middle East, they're going to realize that the world has changed, and just doing that in that two-step procedure doesn't make sense. First of all, even on the nuclear part of it, probably people say that the timeline was a bit too short. Maybe you have to convince the Iranian to commit to more than 10, 15 years and so on. And one idea might be you negotiate, or you try to negotiate a variant of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on the nuclear, and you start in parallel negotiation also on the regional stuff, on the missiles, on the ballistic, on the precision missiles. And you do give them some carrots by having some of the sanctions phased out if you commit to a nuclear deal, but not all of them, because the last thing you really want to is that Iran starts using that financial power to help its own proxies. And right now, given the COVID crisis and the sanction, the power of Iran of supporting even Hezbollah and others is constrained. And the US is realizing that in the Middle East, you have a bunch of semi-failed states, if not utterly failed states. And this is a threat to the US national security, whether it's Libya, whether it's Yemen, whether it's Lebanon, whether it's Syria, whether it's trouble in Iraq. This is something that is a threat to the United States. And therefore, it's not, the regional issues are important for the US because chaos in the Middle East is something that's not good. It leads to terrorism, leads to instability of various sorts. So I think that once they sit down, they might have a much more nuanced view of how to approach the Middle East in a more holistic way. And therefore, it's not going to be jumping in automatically in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, but think of something that has a sequence that leads you to deal with the broader regional stability issue. Maybe that's the way they're going to take eventually, when they think about it carefully.
Well, I think this is a very wise approach, Nuria Rubini. I hope they hear you and that they listen to the wisdom in what you're saying. Philip Ackerman, not good to do a two-step approach. Is Germany, for example, I don't know if you agree with Nuria Rubini, but is Germany, for example, willing to come in, step in and on this one, and basically just really give true emphasis to the fact that there has to be not a later step on the regional or the missiles, but the regional in particular, the regional behaviors of Iran in the countries such as Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Yemen. How ready is Germany in its capacity as in the presidency of the EU to step in on this one and make sure there is a structure that is completely separate and parallel and in parallel?
Don't forget the support to Hamas also.
Hamas also, Hamas also, you are right. So let me say that, first of all, I have to say that our presidency will end in 2 weeks, right? The Portuguese will take over on 1st of January, but the fact remains that Germany will be an important player in the EU also in the month and the year to come. Now, let me say that we agree on the analysis completely. I mean, there is no difference between us and whatever I hear here, when it comes to the regional behavior, when it comes to regional behavior above all, but also missiles, And when the Kuwaitis say to me, we don't care so much about nuclear, because when they do something nuclear to us, they will be hit also. So they don't do any nuclear. We are afraid of missiles, and I understand that. Yeah, short-range missiles for Kuwait is 10 times more dangerous than it is than nuclear is. So this is all taken into consideration. The question is, the relation is pretty damaged over the last 4 years. The economy is in shambles. Nothing has changed basically. You are right, they are not as rich, or they don't have as much money as they used to, but is there any change in their behavior? The reaction is no. So I think what we have to find is an entrance. You know, how do we sit down with them and take all these matters up? And I will not, you know, it's not the time for me to say here, we will get back 100% to the JCPOA. We know it, because of course, General Votel is right when he says 2021 is not 2016. We have 4 years in between, 4 tough years from various point of views, angle of views. But we have to find an entrance for all these matters. And this entrance needs to be somehow to go back to that, what we have agreed to, in what ways, of whether we lift all sanctions at a time, whether we go incrementally, that remains to be seen. And I think the E3 will be sitting there with the US and try to figure out how to do things. And we have to take up all these questions at a time. But I think we cannot not sit down with the Iranians, because what we have seen, maximum pressure is nothing, living nothing, you know, nothing. Raghida, I'm sorry to say, Hezbollah support of Iran has not been an iota less in the last 4 years. So
by the way, sorry, you have, as Germany, you have a new relationship with Hezbollah, but have you considered sanctions against Hezbollah on that, on the level of...
We don't have any relationship with Hezbollah, and what we have is...
Sanctions.
We have no investment, and what we did was we have what we say a law that forbids activities for Hezbollah in Germany. So we have forbidden Hezbollah activities in Germany, which is basically a sanctions regime, if you will. So Hezbollah is, for us, we see Hezbollah in all its glory. We see it as one of the spoilers of Lebanon. Only one, Raghida. It's only one. There are a couple of others, but it's the main spoiler, maybe. Yeah.
Of course, of course. Listen, Rubini, please, Nuria Rubini, quickly. I want to go to Ayad Allawi, quickly, please.
Yeah, you just wanted to make 2 points briefly. One is that from the European point of view, having a bunch of failed states in the Middle East is a threat to the security of Europe. We saw with the refugees coming from Syria, and you have a whole bunch of other states may collapse, and you'll have millions of other people going or trying to go into Europe. So I think that the regional issues are actually of key paramount importance, because more than the nuclear threat for Europe is really the chaos in the region, and the migration is going to be a threat to Europe. First point. Second point, I fear that Iran, and I'm not taking the part of Iran, has sort of given up on the US, because even if there is a new deal with Iran, what if in 4 years from now, Trump becomes president again, or Pompeo, or Mike Pence, or some of those right-wingers? The Iranians feel like even if you do a deal, the next US president may just undo it. And I think that the Iranians have made a strategic decision to have an alliance with with China.
That's
economic,
right.
Financially, politically, even geopolitically, even military exercises in the Gulf between the Chinese and the Iranians. And at this point, we have to think about whether we're giving up on Iran, because Iran is going to China, or we want to re-engage Iran to make sure that Iran actually is not ending up into a implicit, if not explicit, alliance with China. That's another issue that the West has to think about carefully.
That's right. Joseph Votel, take a note of that, because I want to, when I give you the floor for doing your concluding remarks before you depart earlier than others, please take a note of what Nouriel Rubini just said. I'd like you to address that issue, please. But I want to go to Ayad Allawi, please. We didn't speak about Turkey. Of course, Turkey is also a threat to Europe in a certain way, in the policies.
Especially now.
Pardon?
Especially now with the Mediterranean Sea.
All right, go ahead, please.
But you know, let me tell you something, then tell our friends. I took an initiative with in 2005 to invite Iran and Turkey for a conference under the auspices of the United Nations. Mr. Mubarak, the late Mubarak, hosted the conference. And we, of course, the 5 permanent members attended on the level of foreign ministers. And it was under the auspices of Kofi Annan. And Iran attended, and also Syria attended. And there was obstacles against Iran and against Syria from America, a refusal. But I insisted that they should come, because they were causing problems. And me and the late Mubarak arranged a kind of minutes for the meeting, including to form a group with each country, America, Iraq, and Syria, America, Iraq, and Turkey, America, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. And then we were working towards Iran also, including Iran. In that period of time, after the conference, Iran never really tried to do anything in Iraq or in the region at all. They were kept at bay and they played a constructive role. I think now also we need to have a comprehensive structured policy towards Iran. We can't leave it alone, given the fact that the international global problems are increasing, with China and with the Russian Federation and so on between the states. And we like to see the forces of moderation working together to bring about a reasonable and sensible solution, permanent solution for the region. And this cannot be done unless there is a kind of discussions with the leaders of the region.
So absolutely, but isn't that also the onus is on the leaders of the region to make sure that they are seen and felt, and they also have leverage they should use with everybody, with the Americans, with the Europeans, with themselves, amongst themselves.
Yes, Europe is very close, and Europe just, I think Ackerman pointed out, we are flooding Europe with refugees.
And Rubini pointed to that.
Okay. It's true, it's a true phenomenon.
Let me do something here, which is a little bit not the norm. I promised General Joseph Votel that he can leave exactly in 4 minutes. So I want to start earlier the idea of giving each of you two minutes for conclusion, because we're just about to finish up our time. But I'll start with Joseph Votel, and he will have to leave us even when you are still talking, because this is the agreement we had made. So I want to give you 2 minutes, General Votel. Try to address this China-Iran pact, which is very important. And what will the US do? And why are we so nervous about what the Biden administration is doing? Because they're not really reaching out to make people feel a little more secure in this region. Is there something you are telling the Biden team to do? And actually, is there something you can carry to the Biden team from this conversation in order to pay attention? Because I think a lot of points were made to say, just don't jump, don't go fast, and leave us.
Sure, thank you. And it's been great to be with you. First off, I would say this is that the competitive advantage relationship that we have with China will be a principal driver of U.S. national security strategy for the foreseeable future. That is going to be a fact. I think that has been in a case with this administration. I think it will transcend to the next administration. And so as we look at that, as we understand that, that means that's not something that's just playing out in the South China Sea. That plays out globally. So when you look at a relationship between Iran and China, long term, and the impact that has on U.S. Not only the region but our interests in the region, I think it should stoke strong interest in the United States in terms of an approach that tries to nullify that and offer other opportunities rather than pursuing that. I think that has to be considered. We have to think about our relationship with China much more globally and how it plays out in other areas where we have important interests for the country. To close, I would just say this with respect to the Biden administration. Now, I think, is a time for clarity in our strategy, clarity in our communications, clarity in the things that we are doing. I think it is a time for relationship building and rebuilding, and that will be absolutely vital to this. And if there's one thing that they can do, this would be the most important piece, I think, is to restore some of these relationships. And then third would be to ensure that our diplomatic outreach to the region equals and hopefully exceeds our military emphasis in the region. This is, I think, extraordinarily important, and it has led to an imbalanced approach to the region, in my view, one that is overly heavy on military response and military approaches. And we need a much more aggressive, sustained diplomatic approach to the region. Thanks again for the
Thank
opportunity.
you for joining me, General Joseph Votel. Thank you very much for the honor, and let you go. You're off the hook, but I'm going to continue the conclusion remarks with the rest of my distinguished guests. I'll go now to Ayad Allawi. 2 minutes to you quickly, please. And then I'm going to go to Philip Ackerman and Nuria Rubini. Ayad Allawi.
Again, I think times are changing and circumstances are changing and conflicts are changing. And I think the Americans do not have the superpower image anymore, a global unipolar power. China is emerging, the Russian Federation is coming back to the scene, and we need really to consult, and I regard the United States and Europe are the moderates. I regard also many Arab countries are moderates, and we need to put our minds together to develop a policies on what to do and what not to do, and to have a structured policy. And I think one should think also of creating some new agencies, changing probably some of the United Nations bylaws, and trying to achieve peace in the world. Otherwise, I can see that things are moving in a very difficult position.
Ayad Allawi, I want to push you on one thing that is, Iraq and Lebanon are in a very similar situation. And I know that you are very close to a lot of the people we are no longer close to in government, in power in Lebanon. Do you have one quick advice for the Europeans should they sanction them like the Americans started, or in support of the French initiative? One quick word on that.
بصراحة يعني, with all honesty, sanctions to make people suffering is not going to pay dividends. They did it with Iraq and they didn't pay. They did it with South Africa and they didn't pay. That's why we need to have a selected and controlled sanctions against individuals rather than...
Yes, I'm talking about that. I'm talking about against individuals like the Americans have done against individuals in Lebanon, in power. At any rate, I'm going to take that question now to Philip Ackerman. There's talk about Europeans or some Europeans being ready to back up the French initiative by considering sanctions against individuals who are blocking the French initiative for Lebanon. Is this actually true? Is this being considered?
Well, frankly, I mean, the Americans have sanctioned Gibran Bassil because of his closeness to Hezbollah and, of course, many Hezbollah people. The French are adamantly against any sanctions against individuals, totally. They think that this is very detrimental, and basically the French, as you know, in Lebanon, they have taken the lead very strongly. We had last week a long conference on Lebanon again with no result, I'm very sad to say. But what I think our strategy for Lebanon is, when we are to give money for reconstruction or development, this money will not flow until a deep and profound process of reforms is underway. So what we have said to the Lebanese is, don't expect the Lebanese current government, don't expect us to come up with help. And I'm not talking about humanitarian help, that is of course independent, but don't expect us to come up with help unless and until you have formed a new government and implemented or at least started a new program of reforms, and otherwise it's not going to happen. And I think at the end of the day, they must abide, because Lebanon will not survive if it doesn't get foreign aid or foreign development money.
Thanks for
it is completely dependent on us, on the donor community, and so far they play, I must say, it's like gambling with a very small reserve they have in the National Bank, and one day they will be bankrupt, and that's very bad.
I can't pursue this any further because of the time. Nuria Rubini, take a look at whatever you want to say for conclusion, but one word about what Philip Ackerman said about Lebanon, just one quick word. And then you have 40 seconds for conclusion, Nuria Rubini.
Well, I don't follow Lebanon as much, but I'll start with the big picture. And the big picture is that there is this strategic rivalry between the US and China. And I think in order to address it, the US, first of all, has to work with its allies in Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, because it's not going to be able to manage the rise of China on its own. So that's clear and it's going to go in that direction. The question mark, however, is what you do with the implicit new allies of China, because China is building implicit, if not explicit, alliances with Iran, with Russia, with North Korea, with Pakistan. One way is to say we give up on them and we cannot do much about it, but there may be ways of re-engaging Iran or even Russia on this issue in a way that are not going to go with China fully and completely. So we have to think not only about working with the allies, but also working with the strategic rivals. And that has implication for what the approach of US towards Iran and the region should be. You don't want them to end up in the arms of China. So you have to think about that.
I totally agree with you, and thank you very much. Hold on, don't go away. I want to tell you who do we have for next week. It's going to be an all-female cast of policymakers. 5 women are going to be my guests, and we're going to talk policy like you have not heard policy being spoken about. I'm going to give you the names quickly before the electricity cuts me off. We have Tatiana Fuller, Alina Khatib, Eli Jeremiah, and we have Florence Gobb and Karen Young. You will look them up. We will tell you who they are shortly.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Pleasure to speak to you. Bye.
Yeah, great being on this call. Goodbye to everyone. Cheers.
Okay, don't say I did not warn you. I'm so sorry this happens.
You did.
But allow me to thank you all for a most enlightening conversation. It's always too short. It's always too short. But thank you so very much for joining me. And please join next week for the fantastic 5 female, or actually we're going to be 6 policy influencers, policymakers, and Beirut Institute will be for the 27th e-policy circle next Wednesday, always at the same time. Thank you for joining me, everyone. Goodbye for now.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye for now. Shukran. Thank you. Goodbye for now. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.